All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the June Community IT Innovators webinar. Thank you for joining us today to learn more about alternatives to SharePoint Online for document management. Today's webinar is the third and final episode of our three-part series on online document management solutions. And next quarter, we're going to begin a new series on IT management, and we hope you can join us for that. My name is Johan Hammerstrom. I'm the President and CEO of Community IT and the moderator for this series. We'd like to share a few webinar tips with you before we begin. Most importantly, we encourage you to interact with us by asking questions on the GoToWebinar chat feature or connecting with us via Twitter. We'd also like to remind you to avoid multitasking during the webinar. You may just miss the best part. If you do miss the best part or need to leave the webinar early, we will be posting links to the recording and slides on our website, YouTube channel, and SlideShare account. In case you're not familiar with Community IT, our skilled and certified team of IT professionals serves the Greater Washington nonprofit community, helping organizations of all sizes and capacities to advance their missions through the effective use of technology. We are deeply invested in the nonprofit community, having served over 900 nonprofits since 1993. And we take a strategic and collaborative approach that fits the unique needs and culture of nonprofit organizations. And now it's my pleasure to turn over today's webinar to our presenters, Johanny Torrico and Steve Longenecker, to introduce themselves. Good afternoon.
Hi, I'm Steve Longenecker. Good to be here today.
And Johanny Torrico, Community IT's Vice President of Operations. This is our third webinar of a SharePoint series. If you were not able to attend them, I really encourage you to watch those recordings, and you can actually find those links in our website. Today, we will review some enterprise-level solutions that can be alternatives to SharePoint as a document management cloud solution. We know that adopting SharePoint as a cloud-based document management can bring many benefits to your organization. And in fact, we're big fans of SharePoint, but we do recognize that an implementation can be time-consuming and can be very complex. As an introduction, Steve will actually quickly summarize for us when SharePoint is not a good fit. Then, before we actually review some of the most used enterprise solutions out there, we thought that it would be very important to talk about the main differentiators among the different players. We thought that it is important for us to provide you with some key elements to look out for when you're looking at those solutions. Then after that, we'll just jump right into reviewing those alternatives to SharePoint. Are we good, Steve? Are we ready?
Let's go.
All right. Go for it.
Okay, so at Community IT, we have invested a lot in learning about SharePoint, and I'd say it's fair to say we know more about SharePoint than really any of these alternatives that we're going to talk about, just because we've worked with it so much. So I just want to acknowledge that and say that there will be probably times in the webinar when we still sound like we're SharePoint fans, and we are, but it is true that we recommend and support a number of alternatives when SharePoint's not a good fit, and so that is obviously the point of this slideshow. So before discussing that further, we should probably just briefly review why one would move to the cloud in the first place for document storage and document management. These are things that we've talked about a lot before, so I want to go over them quickly. One is just business continuity, this idea that when you're moved to a cloud where you have economies of scale with a service provider that you don't have at home in your own on-premise solutions, that you have better business continuity, lower risk of a single point of failure like a file server going down. Any of these cloud management services are more likely to have better SLAs than an on-premise server that you support yourself. Remote access is obviously probably the most important reason that people move to the cloud, that you can access your files really anywhere you have an internet connection. and that remote access idea would extend to maybe be able to make documents available to external partners, whereas that's not something that IT likes people to do with an on-premise file server, to say, hey, why don't you log into our network and access this Excel spreadsheet and update the numbers, because it's difficult to sort of give that kind of granular access to just one file with an on-premise file server solution, but that's not hard with most of these cloud solutions. And then just in addition to that sort of remote access idea, just in general, there's a richer feature set available with these cloud-based document management solutions than an on-premise file server would have. And we're going to be talking about that, throughout this deck. But some of the ones that we'll talk about are things like richer search, tagging, potentially co-authoring, all of those things that aren't available with a file server. So we want to talk about the downsides of SharePoint and why you would presumably be interested in some alternatives. And I just want to preview that, yeah, as Johanny said, we're going to go through a whole bunch of differentiators to consider when we're evaluating solution, and that's coming next. But just before we get there are some of the reasons that you might not choose SharePoint because it's not a good fit in all situations. First of all, SharePoint is part of a larger Office 365 ecosystem, which actually includes the Microsoft Office desktop suite, Word, Excel, that we're all familiar with. When that is sort of your world, SharePoint is a very logical and value-laden part of it. But if it's not, and it's not for everybody, then that's not the case. So we do have clients who, really don't rely on Microsoft Office Desktop Suite much, or if they rely on the Desktop Suite, that's pretty much all they rely on, and pretty much everything else is in other systems. If you have email on Office 365 or something else, then yeah, SharePoint's your way, but that value is lost if it's not the case. If SharePoint is got a lot of features, but if those features aren't needed, then this third point that it's complicated starts to surface as an issue. It's a heavy thing. There's so much that you can control. So uploading a document, which is might not seem like it should be that big a deal. With SharePoint, maybe you're entering metadata every time, and metadata is controlled by a term store admins group, and if you're not a member of that group, then you have to ask to add a new term. All of that stuff, for some situations, delivers value in the end. That metadata is very important to search, and it helps keep things organized, and it helps in many ways, and people like it and value it. But if you just need something simple, then maybe it's too complicated. The complications of SharePoint have another cost in that it's a higher cost to migrate in terms of time, in terms of user attention, the cash out the door for paying for consultants, all of that. So it being complicated is a downside for SharePoint for sure. SharePoint's based on a totally different paradigm. We talked about this quite a bit in our earlier webinars in this series, but the browser-based access to files is different. You're not using Windows Explorer or the Microsoft OS Finder anymore. Metadata as a way of organizing things instead of folder hierarchies is a new paradigm. So that's complicated and new, and sometimes isn't worth the trouble. And then finally, we do have almost all of our clients are nonprofits, and most of them are 501c3s. We do have a couple churches that aren't actually 501c3s. They wouldn't qualify for the free Office 365 deal. And then some of the 501c3s aren't qualified because they fall sort of outside the Microsoft's definitions, and like associations, for example, like associations of professionals aren't qualified even if they are 501c3s. So there are nonprofits that aren't qualified nonprofits, and if that's the case, it might still be a good price, a good value, and worth the retail price, but it's certainly a different playing. It's not quite the same compelling thing as when it's free.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to talk about differentiators, and just a quick word about sort of how we wanted to, why we did it this way. I mean, I think we conceived of this webinar as SharePoint alternatives, and we're going to review the alternatives that we recommend and support. And there are a few. I mean, there are like a handful, and we will get to those. But it also occurred to us that we should probably talk about sort of the ways in which we evaluate those solutions. So if you want to sort of in your mind imagine sort of a feature matrix, and then you could run along the different solutions and evaluate, you know, plus, minus, or neutral for each of them, or a score of 1 to 5 or something. And you see these things, you know, in all sorts of software reviews for all sorts of different kinds of IT solutions. And we thought we should go through some of the things that that these differentiators that we use to sort of think about the different alternatives. Not all the differentiators are important to everybody. For example, the next slide is about security, and strong security might be really especially important for like a government watchdog nonprofit that is worried, you know, about the fact that maybe what they do is not popular with everyone, and that they might be a target for not if they don't have good security, compared to like a homeless advocacy organization. So these differentiators, we're putting them out there, and you can take them for how they, you know, for yourself, for which ones are important to you. So first of all, security. Not all of the alternatives in cloud-based document management solutions are the same when it comes to security. First of all, there's regulatory compliance. If you are like a nonprofit healthcare clinic, you have HIPAA concerns, and you need to have, if you're going to have files with patient information, and then those files need to be stored in a solution that's HIPAA compliant. FIPS compliance, another thing. So that's just something to check for. This whole idea of private encryption keys is something that I don't think many of our clients would worry about, but I could see, like, again, like the proverbial government watchdog being concerned about this. And this idea is, I've seen it also as BYOK, bring your own key. Spider Oak, which is not one of the solutions that we necessarily recommend, but it comes up when you Google this because they sort of most famously built their brand promise around this, and it might even be worth Googling Spider Oak just to sort of see their marketing material about it. But it's this idea that, you know, yes, your files, your documents should be encrypted, obviously in transit, but even in storage at your host, at your cloud solution provider, they should be encrypted. But if the keys are like also there with the host, then it's encrypted, and that's good. It means that like the risks with hacking are much smaller. But if, for example, your government watchdog and your documents are suddenly subpoenaed, and you know the solution provider just hands them over because that's what happens when you get subpoenaed, and that's what should happen when you get subpoenaed. But if you want to have control over that, then if you have the private encryption keys and the solution provider does not, they can give the files, but they're encrypted files, and it's of no use to the government or whoever it is that gets them without you giving permission. Now, if you still get subpoenaed next, but that's at least your choice. So that's an interesting idea. Box has this for what it's worth. SharePoint is building it now, but doesn't have it yet. At least it didn't as of an article I read published in this spring. Dropbox doesn't have this. Google does not have this for their Google Drive. So it's like a you know, sort of an on the edge differentiator, but it's the kind of thing we're talking about. The solutions have different degrees of logging and auditing. This can be important for security if you want to see who opened what file or who changed what file. Logs and audits can be are very important for that. So that if that's important to you, you want to have more of it, not less of it. And then data loss protection and data rights management. I think this is also sort of on the edge of what's important to sort of the generic community IT client. But it's worth thinking about just because it sort of helps frame the larger picture. But this is the idea that, like, you know, a very simple example of data loss prevention, which actually I think is should be kind of a standard feature for, you know, for all of these services, is okay, you're going to send out a link to an external partner so that they can have access to your document. You should be able to set an expiration date on that at the time you send the link. so that it's only available to the partner for the week that you allow it to be, and after a week, without you going back and doing it, automatically expires. And if they click on that link a week afterwards, it will say this is not a link that's no longer working. That's a very simple example of data loss prevention. More sophisticated ones would be like, by policy, when you open a certain file, it forces you to enter a business reason that you are looking at this file and sort of heightens your awareness that this is a sensitive file and you need to be careful with it. Data rights management, this is an example of where I know more about the Office 365 products than I do about anything else. I think there are some of these things do exist a little bit in Box, although I think with Box it's more in the third party. But with SharePoint, it's not by any means with default. I think it's a little bit tricky to set up. But once it's set up, you can actually have, when you open a file from SharePoint in Word and try to copy and paste, it won't let you, which I think that's really cool and slick. Again, do any of our clients really need it? Not necessarily, but it is a differentiator, and it's part of a spectrum of differentiators. All right, that's that slide, Johnny. And I'm going to try to pick up the pace here. Vendor fitness is something to consider. Definitely you should look at the service level agreement. Was it 99.9, 99.99? Support options. I really think that email is probably not good enough if files are important to you. You want to be able to make a phone call probably 24/7, but certainly during business hours, because that's really where things get solved sometimes. Email, it just takes too long to go back and forth. The long-term prospects of the vendor is something that people might not always think about, but if you're buying your document management from a vendor that goes out of business, that could be a problem. So it's nice to have your vendor be a vendor that the business world thinks is in good shape and has a good business model and is going to be around for a long time. I think that almost all of the solutions that we recommend and support would fall into that category. And then geo-redundancy of data centers, we weren't sure where to put this. We put it on this slide. This is sort of like, do they just have one data center and actually you think that you're getting really good what's the word I'm looking for? The idea that there's not a single point of failure and stuff, but you want to have someone who has the wherewithal, the money to sort of really build this out right. Actually, Box has this interesting thing where not only do they have geo-redundant data centers, but there's now an option for you to say, I want all my data centers to be in Europe or only in America, and that has to do with, it doesn't matter to our clients, that has to do with like regulatory issues. So like if it matters where you keep your data because different regulatory agencies regulate different geographic areas, then you can control that, and that's something that Box has done recently.
That's great. I didn't know that. You learn one thing every day, I guess, a new thing. All right. So moving on. Another differentiator is kind of automation, and some of the cloud management solutions, well, the enterprise solutions out there, include some level of workflows, some more complex than others. SharePoint, for instance, has a basic repository of workflow rules that can be easily implemented to kind of automate some of the organization's business processes. Oh, and by the way, for those of you that are not familiar with workflows, a workflow is kind of a series of steps. Each step can include one or more actions, and also can include conditions like the if and else, and you have different stages, and those stages actually dictate which action happens next. So kind of a very simple example of a use case can be, for instance, an email is sent automatically to you once a document status on your document library has been changed from pending to approved, for example. So that's kind of some automation that can happen with some enterprise tools that allows for workflow rules. Another differentiator is the ability to apply some retention policies, the ability to have a kind of a disposal of document rules throughout the life of a document. you can set policies around retention and this document. You don't want these documents in this library to ever get deleted, or also after 2 years move these documents to this archive library, and then you have some policies on that archive library depending on the type of documents that you're storing there. So those things are sophisticated, and some solutions out there have them. What else? Yeah, and then you also, on some of those are just kind of document templates. That's also kind of automation. So just talking about in SharePoint, for example, you can actually, create some kind of document sets, and those document sets will create, a series of templates based on your needs. And, just with one click, you'll have a kind of a folder type of document set. And then inside that, you can have 2, 3, 4 different templates based on your needs. So that's kind of the level of automation that you can get with some of those solutions. So we also have kind of here bells and whistles. So this list is more of a features of provided by the different solutions that we will mention. This list actually can be more extensive, but based on our experience and the kind of what the organizations that we work with have expressed, this is kind of the a list that they really look for. And they're cool. So co-authoring was introduced first by Google in Google Docs. It is browser only, but still is really nice when you're working on some a Google Doc document, and then somebody else is doing the same thing, and then immediately you can see the changes in a different color. Microsoft can do it too now in the Office desktop suite. The advantage, I think, though, that Microsoft has over other competitors, including Google, is that most of us are used to work with Office products. So we work on Word or Excel. And the fact that now Microsoft can not only allow for co-authoring capabilities when you're using their Office Online, but also when you're actually working on your local Office application is just amazing. So, a quick example, we were Johan, Steve, and I, the three of us were actually working in this PowerPoint at the same time, and and all the changes were syncing. We could see who was actually working on the PowerPoint at any given time, and and it just works. It worked very well, and it continues to evolve. I mean, a year ago, Word used to crash every time you tried to do that, and the changes were not immediate. You have to close your copy and all of that, and it does still happen. I know that Steve this morning had to close it and reopen it, and then it was working again, but that happens less and less now. So that's so let me be clear, though. This is only possible if you're working on a file directly from or in the cloud. So if you have, documents on your, sync solutions, those cannot do this. Another differentiator kind of feature and a nice thing to kind of have is searching. And enterprise searching is actually built into some solutions, and some are more robust than others. I would say that Microsoft and Google are definitely the leaders here. They continue to invest on enterprise machine learning search engines. So Microsoft Office Graph is technology, for example, is very cool, and can actually surface documents that you might need with Delve. And if you don't know what Delve is, actually, you can just refer to the first webinar that we did, and Steve actually had kind of a demo, and he included a little bit of Delve. But basically, it's kind of an engine that will surface documents that that they think you might need, or that might be important to you, and they get it right most of the time. I mean, I work with Delve all the time, and so does Steve, and we love it. Integration with other tools. So you want a solution that is agnostic, I would say, a solution that works well not only on a Windows environment, but also, on Mac OS. We see more and more offices that actually have a mixed environment where some, people use Macs and some others use Windows. And so you want a solution that kind of integrates well with, with those, at least those two big players. You want mobile integration, and so you want something that actually plays nice with iOS, Windows Mobile, and Android. You might also want a solution that has a tie integration with, Office Desktop Suite. And most of us, like I mentioned, in most of the organizations that we work with, they use Microsoft products very heavily. And, one of the reasons for that is because of the non-profit pricing. And it makes it very easy for, our clients to, to get licenses for Office, for Office 365, and for different, Windows servers. And so the integration, especially with the Office Desktop Suite, is very, very important. Outlook, too. Our email is an Outlook, so you might want to have a solution that actually is, works seamlessly with Outlook too. If you have a third-party applications like DocuSign, or even if you use Salesforce, if your organization uses Salesforce, then you might want to also find a solution that is closely integrated with them too. And I know that I think Box and SharePoint actually integrates well with both, I want to say. Correct me if I'm wrong, Steve. Online editing, it's another important feature. Again, some are more robust than others. Google Docs and Microsoft Office Online are the winners here, in my opinion. Some of the other possible solutions, like Dropbox, also have kind of an online tool, but it's I would say it's very basic, and they don't even come close to Microsoft of what Google provides in terms of the Office Online or the Word Online experience. And also, again, here it comes to play the integration with Office Suite. Office Online is great, and they keep adding more and more features. And you can spin up a document online right away, and you can share that with your external users, and they can also use Office Online on their end. That's kind of the bells and whistles for when you're kind of looking for a solution out there. And then this is a very important one, I think. Admin control, and here I think is where most of the solutions falls short. And well, I mean, if you're I think if you're putting together a table comparing and betting the different solutions and what they provide, here is where you will actually cross most of them out, because the admin control and the centralized management is just some of the solutions just lack that. So, another thing is metadata management. So some solutions will allow for tagging, and then you will have a way to manage those terms. SharePoint does that and does that very well. So we just actually talk about retention policies. So so some solutions will also provide you with a platform for auditing and access control reporting. So if that's important to you, to kind of run reports on and audit who has access to which files and who's accessing what information. So, keep in mind that when you're actually vetting the different solutions. And I think the most important differentiator is user management and access control. So again, does the solution that you are looking at have a way to central manage all of your users and to manage their passwords and to control access and have permissions and have granular control of those permissions or group permissions? Does the solution integrates with your Active Directory, right? If you use Active Directory to manage all your users and the access, then that's very important. So you need to keep that in mind. So yeah, and so that's That's all. I mean, SharePoint Online is kind of the winner, and it's a Microsoft product. And when I mention Active Directory, you know, it's also kind of part of the Microsoft environment or ecosystem. So of course, you know, it plays nicely, and right off the box with SharePoint, you can easily actually put this in place, have access control, log your document libraries, create groups, manage your permissions, and they make it easy. They make it easy. Did I miss anything, Steve?
No, I think that's good. I mean, I do think what we were talking about at the beginning of this section about how different differentiators or features will be important to clients to different degrees, you know, holds certainly on this one, on the admin control that you were talking about. SharePoint has so much that it can almost wear you out sometimes because there's a switch or a value for everything, and usually you just roll with the default and it's okay. But that level of that control can be daunting sometimes. I do think that we do have clients for whom it's just not that big a deal, like being able to control whether there's minor and major versions doesn't matter to them, or to set, you know. But yes, I think you're right, and I do think that you're right that while the solutions that we're going to get to the alternatives that we recommend and support here soon, I do think that the ones we've chosen for the most part, you know, meet what we consider to be the minimum standards, and that when you say you're crossing most of them off, you're talking about when you Google document storage, there's a lot that shows up, and a lot of those are the ones that fall short in this category. Yeah, no, I agree with you completely on that. So I'm going to talk about technical limits, which it's kind of a catch-all slide here, really, but it is true that, you know, and I think part of it is the reason I'm sounding a little bit like not that worried about this is because I think a lot of these technical limits have now, all of the different services have for the most part reached a state where they exceed the technical limits, so to speak. So it used to be a big concern with SharePoint that you couldn't upload files larger than, was it 2 gigabytes, Johanny? I think it was 2 gigabytes.
Right, it was 2.
Well, now it's 10, which is a lot more. It's true that people that you might have videos that are larger than that might be of concern, but for the most part, it seems like most of the files that we encounter are well less than 10 gigabytes. So it's sort of like more and more, all of them meet sort of the requirements. But it's probably worth asking the question, you know. One thing actually where SharePoint, I think, comes up short is the number of items per library folder. This is a limit that I think is set sort of by the SQL backend that SharePoint rests on. There's some nuances to this that I'm not going to go into now, where you can sort of work around some of these issues. But yeah, we sort of tell our clients, you know, we really want to have our libraries have, you know, 5,000 items or less, sort of at the root of the library, and you know that's a limitation. Invalid characters and file names. Different solutions have different standards. It's not a problem when you're creating files. Once you're in the solution and creating new files, because you just follow the rules, like, you know, okay, I can't use the ampersand, fine. But if you are migrating from a Windows file server that allows more extensive use of special characters, and you're migrating from there, you're going to, it's, you know, probably something that you have a tool that works around, and you fix the 300 files out of your 10,000 files that got flagged for being an issue. But still, it just adds to sort of your migration cost. This is not a limit, but a big sort of technical differentiation between the different kinds of solutions is the synchronization model. Dropbox is the best example of that, and we'll talk about Dropbox, you know, in detail in a couple slides. But this idea that you have files in the cloud, but really you're interacting them off of a local synced cached copy, and that you have a sync utility running in the background that's constantly updating anything that changes in the cloud because somebody else is changing a file gets synced down to your local copy, and anything you change, you open it on your local copy, and then as you save it, it syncs it up to the cloud. That's one model. The other is the browser-based. This is the one that Johanny was saying you have to have if you're going to do good co-authoring, where you actually are opening the file from the cloud. So you have a Word plugin or if you're using SharePoint that's just built into Word, but if you're using Box, you have a Word plugin, or Google, you have a Word plugin for Google, and it basically accesses the cloud directly and opens the file from the cloud. That's one way. Or you like double click on it in the cloud and it launches either your browser-based editor or your editor. And so you're working off of the cloud, and it's browser-based is the way you access the files. Those are sort of two different models. And then I added this sort of at the last minute, but tagging sophistication is sort of I guess a technical limit. Most solutions allow some sort of tagging, but some of them are much more robust than others, and kind of how those tags are managed. And we talked about that a little bit on the last slide.
Right. And I want to kind of just clarify quickly, Steve, on the number of items per library. On the SharePoint, the 5,000 that we actually recommend our clients is because of performance, not because of a limit of SharePoint.
Sure.
You know, I mean, I think the limit right now is like 20,000, but just to kind of, for performance reason, then we say, you know, if you have more than 5,000, then we might want to break that into different libraries.
Thank you. Yeah.
No problem.
So the next slide is about that. Obviously, cost is a differentiator. So the big sort of free ones for nonprofits are the Microsoft Office 365 solutions, and then Google Drive or Google Apps. A number of other of the alternatives we're going to mention here do have some nonprofit pricing. So there's some discounts for for 501c3s. But it's a consideration. Obviously, it's an important one. Migration costs are a consideration. I think the financial cost for paying consultants to migrate you to Box, Dropbox, even Google Drive is all probably pretty similar. I think that the costs are higher for the ones where the paradigm shifts. So SharePoint has sort of a shifted paradigm, and so there's higher migration costs because you sort of move the structure of how you think about files into a different paradigm, but also then you have more change management from you're asking for more from your users in terms of how they change their own personal workflows to fit this new solution, and the time they spend getting used to the new solution.
Thank you, Steve. It's great. So now that we have reviewed the differentiators and what to watch out for on the different solutions, let's jump to reviewing some of the most common ones out there. So, I mean, there are a lot of solutions here on these slides, and believe it or not, it's not even half. Yeah. There are way too many options out there. The market for cloud-based document management actually has grown enormously. So we were just looking at a report from Gartner not so long ago, and they have this magic quadrant report on enterprise file synchronization and collaboration solutions. And it was released in 2015, and they mentioned actually that more than 140 solutions have been created since 2010. Too many to fit in this list, Steve, and for Gartner to do a report on. So, I think Gartner had kind of the same method, and they have their differentiators, and they actually, end up only analyzing 16 solutions that kind of fit what they were, fit on their magic quadrant they were looking for. So Steve will tell us a little bit more on Gartner's Magic Quadrant, I'm sure, as he moves and talks about these different solutions. And I think it's important to know also the difference between the enterprise solutions and the end user consumer solutions. And consumers, consumer products don't provide corporate ownership. They allow for only kind of limited permission management, as you know, and that's one of the differentiators. And ad hoc sharing, there is ad hoc sharing with no reference to a centralized identity database like Active Directory or even a regular old list of users. So these consumer solutions, they often provide some amount of free storage to kind of lure you into using that solution. They have questionable SLAs and very limited support. So just be sure that you actually do your homework and pick one of the enterprise solutions and look at all the differentiators. The vendor fitness was a good one, and everything else. So now Steve is going to walk us through 4 enterprise solutions that we recommend that compete with Office 365. And then after that, I'm going to review 2 SharePoint competitors within Office 365 ecosystem. I'm getting too excited, Steve. Go for it.
Thanks. All right, so the first up is Box. So Box is a major player in this space. In a lot of business analysts might say that Box is the one that's in the best position to succeed in the long run for a variety of reasons, most partly because they got there first, also because they've really built their brand around being able to integrate with other solutions, and so they're very agnostic about that, and they're really sort of saying, hey, look, your Salesforce is great. You want to use Salesforce. We're going to be the back end for your documents for Salesforce. Gartner ranks them, so we talked about the Magic Quadrant. The Gartner ranks them in the leader quadrant. So it's the upper right, the one you want to be in, where they have the most completeness of vision and the most ability to execute. They're not the most upper right, I think, but they're like one of 3 that are up in that corner. They do a really good job, I think, of balancing between the simple user experience, having a simple user experience. So it's not so like, I think SharePoint is daunting for a user. Box is pretty familiar if you're used to File Explorer, folders and so on. Box more or less mimics that experience, and then provides tools to make it to add on the extra features, but not to make it too hard. There is a Box sync, but all of their like Box University tutorials and stuff are showing them working in the browser, and that's really, I think, what they're designed for, and that's where it works better. We have had clients complain about Box sync breaking from time to time, which I'm not surprised by. I think it's hard for sync to work, and also there's, as we've mentioned before, once you get into syncing things, you have some other problems inherent in that. I'll talk about that when we get to the Dropbox slide. Box University is really cool, so you can, like, for the change management, you can like take people through like an hour curriculum that's broken down in like little 15-minute videos. Some of the videos are interactive. I mean, that's really nice. I mean, part of the reason it's impressive is because it's packaged as a university. I think there's probably loads more documentation for Google Drive and for SharePoint that's online and accessible to anyone who has the wherewithal to Google it. But it's nice to have this like contained curriculum that you can sort of tell your users to follow through. So I think Box is very much of a strong player. It gets second-tier notice among our clients because it's, even with the nonprofit discount, which is basically 50% of what you'll see on the standard rates, we would say you need to be at least at the business level, which is their second tier, if you're serious about being an enterprise. And when I say that, I mean even if you only got 8, 9, 10 people in your office, you should be a business user. And so that's $15 per month retail, so you're getting it for $7.50 per user per month. So it's not free. So that's a downside. But I do think Box is good. I mean, I think they are probably my go-to alternative for people who don't like SharePoint.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Steve, and I'm assuming also when you want to sync Box or Dropbox or any of these solutions, you need to keep in mind also kind of the space, right? The space that you have on your hard drive,
yeah,
right?
I'm going to talk about that when we get to Dropbox, but yes, absolutely. That's a concern. Yeah. No, I think Box should be you should still plan to be in the browser. when you're using Box, and that, but you don't have to any more than you don't have to with SharePoint. But I think it's going to work better for you.
And do they have, and these sync solutions, do they have a limit on how much you can sync? Like, oh, whenever if it's 20 gigs and you're syncing that, you might have problems, or it's unlimited. I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm throwing all these questions.
Yeah, I don't have that at my fingertips. My impression is that it's not. It's like you're talking about with SharePoint. It's more a performance issue than a technical limit.
Gotcha.
And that I think is why some of our clients have had trouble with the sync, is because they're trying to do too much with it. I think so with Box you would get like like team folders, and then you would also get your personal folder, and we would say feel free to sync your personal folder. For one thing, you're not collaborating with people particularly with that. I mean, you might ad hoc here and there, but mostly it's just yours, and so it's not, you don't have the collaboration problems with sync, but also it's a smaller subset.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. The next slide is Ignite, and I'm going to go through this one quickly. Ignite was our go-to recommendation a number of years ago when people first started saying the cloud, we should be using the cloud, and we were really attracted to its hybrid approach, in which you have a local NAS in your office, and then it's syncing. There's this NAS it's a Netgear ready NAS. It has to be, because they have an app that basically runs on that Linux OS, and then you put in your Ignite corporate account, and it's syncing your cloud down to your NAS, and so your people in the office are actually accessing files from a NAS, and we have clients who are still on it and who like it and work with it well. So I am impressed. We no longer really recommend it anymore, mostly because the similarity of it that it has to a basic file share file server is, like, we feel like that the cloud offers these opportunities to move ahead now and do all these things like that are advanced, like co-authoring and so forth, and certain kinds of tagging, and that if you're going to be still accessing your files mostly through a NAS, you're still basically locked into just sort of the Windows Explorer view of files, and that's limiting. It's $15 per user per month for the business plan. There is a cheaper plan that, for very small shops, that's like if you're like 5, 10, even 15 users, might work for you, that I think is maybe $8 per month, up to 5 terabytes of storage. That NAS service is actually an add-on service. It's included with the business. No, it's an add-on service, and I think that's $50 per month per NAS, which most of our clients would only have one NAS. I also want to say about this. It still gets a good rating. Ignite gets a good rating from like Gartner, and it gets a good rating when you Google around, and so I think partly we got in on the ground floor with Ignite, on sort of what some of its early days of adoption, and really focused on this storage sync of having your NAS in the office, and I think that's still a big part of sort of one of their differentiators. But I think that they get the good grades more on their regular old cloud service, and probably we need to go back and look at them, although again I'm not sure what they would have that Box wouldn't, and Box has got the nonprofit discount and is just as strong, but we do hear they do get good marks, and I think that might be because if you're using the cloud service, you probably the cloud interface would have things like tagging and so on. So I got to keep moving, so let's go to the next slide, Johanny. Next one is Google Drive. First of all, it's part of the Google ecosystem, so you need to do things the Google way, or you're going to be swimming upstream. Maybe one example of that would be like Google is designed to not sort of have centralized, heavy oversight management. So everybody gets their Google Drive, and if you want to share things, you can share things. But you're the one deciding to share them, and they even have groups, and they have like a user database, and you can actually integrate your user database with Active Directory. There's a lot of cool enterprise pieces, but the idea of centrally managing that these files are for the finance team and it's the finance folder, and no, the finance person would have their Google Drive and then they would share it with their team if they want to, but it's coming from them. It's decentralized. We've heard client complaints about the sync tool. I would say you're better off living in their cloud. They have an Office Desktop Suite plugin, but apparently it's clunky. I haven't used it myself, but in a debrief I had with a client, they were saying that every time you basically restarted, you had to relog into the Google Drive with the plugin, and that was kind of a hassle. People didn't like. I mean, Google Search is great, so it's really powerful. Doesn't have the rich taxonomy features of SharePoint, but it's good. Mobile accessibility is strong. We recommend that people that want to move to the Google Drive and the Google system would invest in something like Better Cloud, which is like a third-party add-on that helps you do some of the centralized management stuff, like user management and so on. One question that came in during the registration was about how fine-grained the security controls are for each product, and this is an example of where it does vary, but Google really does. They have great permissions. You can have fine-grained permissions. This folder it could be viewed by these people, and this folder can be viewed and edited by these people, but it's decentralized. And that might be a problem for some organizations and not a problem for others. And just one more thing about the Google way. I just think it's light. So that's their approach, is just that we're lightweight, we're just good enough. I somehow have in my mind that the organizations that we support that are dominated by like the 20-something crowd, they're the ones who want to be in Google Drive and like it a lot, and it really works for them. And one last thing, while there is an Office Desktop Suite, we've heard from clients that like you again keep getting pulled into into using like Google Docs or Google Sheets or Google, what's the spreadsheet one called? No, that's Sheets. Yeah, so you end up, it works better if you try to stay away from the Office suite, and there's some reasons for that. So that's Google Drive. We do have a number of clients using it, and they like it. But
and there's non-profit pricing?
Non-profit pricing for Google Drive is free.
All right.
Yep, which is great. Thanks for making sure I said that. All right, and last one, the one that I think that gets the most interest, certainly from the registration questions, is Dropbox for Business. First of all, we should just sort of acknowledge that it comes from the world of consumer IT. That's a plus and a minus. The enterprise features are just not that robust. They're being added. The Dropbox for Business is not, they are not resting on what they have. They definitely realize that if they're going to get into the business world, they need to keep improving their product so that the features are getting better. But it doesn't, those are sort of tacked on to a product that was originally a consumer product. The positive side of it coming from that world is that probably all of your users have used Dropbox, or many of them have already. And so they're pretty familiar with sort of the whole idea of Dropbox for Business. It's the very best there is when it comes to synchronization. And that's the model that you want to live with if you're going to go with Dropbox for Business. So the idea here is that you have your Dropbox for Business account. If it's your first time, you install Dropbox for Business on your computer, and lo and behold, you have a Dropbox for Business folder that's locally on your, if it's Windows, or your C drive. If it's your Mac, it's there on your Finder, and you drag files and folders into that Dropbox for Business folder, and when you do, it syncs them to your Dropbox for Business cloud that's under your account. And then if you share certain folders, that is then that share is then offered to other users, and if they accept the share, then that syncs down to them. There's selective sync, so you can choose to accept it as something that you can access in the cloud only, but and you have to do that if you have a lot of files out there, because if you're on a lightweight laptop with an SSD drive that's only got 100 gigs of free space, and your organization has 500 gigs of files, you don't want to sync all of it. So you can selectively sync which folders are going to be used. The synchronization doesn't seem to break, and that's great because almost every other solution that, even the ones that we're recommending and supporting, the sync tools break, and that includes SharePoint's. And we basically tell our clients to stay away from synchronization. But if you're in Dropbox, no, this is the whole thing is oriented around synchronization. And in fact, certain things don't work as well if you try to do them in the cloud. So Johanny mentioned that Dropbox had like a browser-based editor. It does, but actually, it doesn't work all the time. You try to open a file in the editor, and it just won't open. It gives you an error, and why some files do and some don't is kind of like mysterious. It seems like I don't know. We don't know why. I mean, maybe we could open a ticket with Dropbox and they could give us moving a huge folder from one like you're reorganizing your folders and you want to move one folder to another. You really shouldn't try to do that in the cloud. You should be able to, and I mean, it's not that it's technically impossible, but you might find that when you do it, it gets halfway in errors or something. But if you do it locally and then let it sync, it's going to work great. So those are some of the things about the synchronization that might be limiting. One more thing, that last bullet point about Project Infinite. So in addition to selective sync, where you choose what to sync and don't sync everything, now they've just introduced, and I haven't tried this yet, but it sounds great, and assuming that it works, it is great. They have something called Project Infinite, where you basically say you want everything to appear as if it's local on your local computer, and yet it's not actually there. So you can see it on your local computer, but until you actually click on it, it's not actually synced. And then when you click on it, you might have to wait a little bit longer, but then it syncs. Assuming you're on the internet, it syncs right then and there, and then you can work with it, which would be pretty good. The enterprise features we talked about. Let me get to the questions because that's where I'll get these things. So, okay, a question during registration was that they were frustrated with the way the permissions that they could sort of put together with Dropbox, and that is a potential source of frustration. You can only set permissions at the top level of your shared folders. So you can't like share the finance folder with the finance team and then within that have a subfolder that's only shared with the executive director and the CFO, but not everybody else. You can't do that. Or you can't add the HR person to the subfolder because there's one thing that they need. If you want to have a folder that's HR and finance, that's a different folder. Put that in the root also and share that way. So it could create a lot. You might have to have a lot of folder sprawl if you have a lot of complex different folders for different collections. If you're an organization where basically there's sort of three different ones, there's the executive team, there's the everybody, and then there's the personal, that's not a problem. But if you have like lots of different groups, then that complexity is a problem for SharePoint. A question about how does Dropbox for Business provide integration with Active Directory structure to manage users and permissions? It is a feature of Dropbox for Business, but I would say it's an asterisk feature. You need to buy a third-party tool. So Okta is the one that we would support. And with Okta, you can do Active Directory integration. But it's not like SharePoint or Google Drive, where there's a tool that comes from Microsoft or Google that basically you put on your domain controller and it takes care of the rest. You need to have an Okta account, which is I think it might be like $5 per user per month or something like that. If you do Okta, you're going to do a lot more than just sync Dropbox. You're going to want to use it for everything, and that's a whole tangent that I won't go into now. Another registration question was, are there features to prevent conflicting copies of files? And I did promise earlier that I would talk about sort of one of the limitations of sync. So if you're working off a local copy and you open a document that's a local copy of the document, the cloud doesn't really know that you've opened that. So if somebody else opens their local copy of that same document, then you both save it, then they both sync. The cloud gets two different versions and there's a conflict. Dropbox basically saves both with like version numbers or maybe the name of the user. I don't think they necessarily actually email notification, which they probably should add that feature and probably could add that feature and probably will. But I don't think right now that they do. But even if they did, you'd still have the work of like two people having to take two different versions or one person taking two different versions and figuring out how to put them, mash them back together into a single authoritative document again. That is sort of a basic limitation of sync. It's one of the advantages of working directly off of the cloud itself through a browser. But no, there isn't really a way to prevent conflicting copies if that's what that question was meaning. One question, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh. Is it possible to have larger thumbnails for images on Dropbox? I didn't even know that that was an issue, but I Googled it, and in fact, it is an issue because it comes up, there's a lot of hits when I Googled that, and the answer is no. At least the cursory Googling suggests that there isn't a way to do that, unfortunately. And then someone else asked, is there a streamlined, user-friendly tutorial for using Dropbox in school settings? And I couldn't find anything that seemed particularly focused on schools. A number of universities have made their tutorials available publicly, but when I looked at them, they didn't seem like they'd be anything, they weren't particularly school focused. It seemed like good stuff, but it seemed like stuff that was pretty generic that would apply to any use case. So that's it. Yeah.
Wow, Steve.
I
Okay,
know.
well,
I have to
it's fine. Oh, this is great. So I'm just
I didn't say the price, did I? The price is $9 per user per month for qualified nonprofits.
There you go. All right. So I'm going to just fly through the other two for Microsoft. So OneDrive for Business. So OneDrive for Business is actually a separate product, and I just want to clarify this. This is a separate product from OneDrive. So OneDrive targets at the consumers and doesn't have any of the enterprise control capabilities that you get with the OneDrive for Business version. So Microsoft OneDrive for Business is available as a standalone if you want to buy it, or it's also can be bundled with the Microsoft Office 365 ecosystem. So, so it has all the bells and whistles of Office 365. So it has the availability, all the geo redundancy, and all the things that we mentioned with Office, that Microsoft provides. You can actually be OneDrive for Business seats actually the back end for Office for OneDrive for Business is SharePoint. So it does give you a lot of more granular control when it comes to adjusting your views or adding additional columns, basic metadata. But this is a little bit complicated. It can be done, but by the fact that you're doing this, it will you're giving up the simplicity of the tool. So another advantage of this, they can be integrated with Active Directory. Again, if it's as part of Office 365, is a Office 365 ecosystem, you can have one single sign-on with if you federate your your Office 365 with your Active Directory list. You can share it ad hoc, you can share it internally. It makes it easy if you're actually, you have all the users there. You can also share it externally, and you can turn off external sharing if you don't want to allow that in your organization. There is a sync tool, so you can actually sync OneDrive for Business into your Windows Explorer or File Explorer. So it's available for Windows. It works very well, I think. There is now also a Mac client available. So if you have a Mac and you want to sync your OneDrive for Business, you can now. I use it, and it works. It works well. It works much better than the Google Drive, because I also have that in my Mac. It does, it needs a little bit of work. Sometimes I need to resync my library back. I work most of, from the browser, so it doesn't bother me. But if you're used to work from, locally with a local sync, it's available if you have a Mac, but it might break. It does integrate, it's again, OneDrive for Business is a Microsoft product, and of course integrates very, very nice with Office Suite, as you would hope. And it allows for, again, co-authoring, the searching with, you have Delve, and it will discover all your documents, and online editing, and all of those features that we mentioned on the differentiators. One thing to look out for, though, is the central management of permissions and access control. So a user owns its OneDrive for Business. So as kind of, if you are trying to manage your organization, if you are on the IT seat, there's no way to central manage this OneDrive for Business account. It's personal. It's for personal use, and so you cannot manage those permissions for the users. You can with a third-party tool. There are third-party tools out there that can actually help you, or help an IT person to kind of manage all of this, but they are actually expensive, and so it will add to the cost. Steve already mentioned the file size limits. It's now 10 gigs, so I'll move on. And then the next one, so Microsoft recently introduced a new feature, and it's called it's part of the Office 365 ecosystem, and it's called Groups, Office 365 Groups. This is not a new piece or add-on technology. Microsoft is actually focusing less and less on the technology, and it's actually focusing mainly on the user experience. And actually, if you take a look at your if you deploy Groups, and if you take a look at the document library that it will provide, it's also kind of it's a SharePoint on the back end. And Groups, basically what it is actually a SharePoint team site. And this is it's a team site on the fly, I would say. And this comes from Microsoft responding to the user experience. So nowadays, it is very easy for people or different departments or teams in your organization to spin up, a Dropbox account so that they can collaborate, or a Google Drive account so they can work on a project. So it's very easy for them to do that, and that's more and more organizations are seeing all of this shadow IT, and Microsoft is seeing that a lot of users are doing that. So this is kind of in response to that. So Microsoft say, oh, we can do that too. So I'm gonna create these groups, and it's just gonna put everything together that you need for your project. So you can you deploy a group, and you'll get a document library, and you can actually invite members to this group, and you can have a calendar. You can also have kind of a conversation, which is kind of an email group, and then you have all those conversations in one single place. So if you work on a project, this is great. Unfortunately, the downside is that it's a half-baked product. It's still not for prime use, in my opinion. There is still some, more work to do with permission management. I mean, again, you can invite members, so you have control over, who joins the product, the group. It can be private or it can be public. You can share. You can invite people from outside your organization and all of that, and that is all good. But if you, let's say, your ED wants to join this, wants to kind of have access to the document library that lives in this group. But he doesn't want to be a member because he doesn't want to be bothered with all the conversations and all of that. He just needs access to that document library. You can do that, but the way to do that is just you need to break the permissions for the group and kind of redo those. So it requires a little bit of work, and God knows what will happen if you actually break those permissions. So definitely some more learning to do with groups, and and Microsoft, it's also kind of putting a lot of work on making sure that this thing comes, it becomes it's ready for prime time. Again, there is no centralized management, and governance is also an issue. Like, anyone can create a group now in the organization by default. There is a kind of a little PowerShell command that you can run to turn that off, but by default is on, and that is a problem for me, at least. And now, and that's go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I was going to say that the positive way to I agree, it's half baked. The positive way to say it is that it's baking. I mean, that we have seen massive
Yes.
amounts of improvements on this particular uh, solution from
Mhm.
Microsoft just in the last 2 months.
Oh
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
they're
And
working crazy on
we've been testing it, and it's great. Yeah, I
it.
totally agree. But it's just not ready for
Not ready
people to
today.
go and deploy groups. Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
meant. All right, now, Steve, you wanna? I know that you have some closing statements to make before we actually conclude. So go ahead.
Closing statement. We really thought we were going to go faster through this, but we just have so much to say. Just a couple more notes, real quick. First of all, the classic document storage. We just want to acknowledge or want to point out that it's just becoming less important all the time. Like more and more, data is going to be stored in databases in your Salesforce cloud or your whatever other CRM you use. It's just no, in email, in Yammer groups, in Slack. I mean, whatever. There's lots and lots of these cloud solutions, and documents may not be anymore where stuff goes. It could be in a wiki. So that's just one thing to just keep in mind. And then I just back to that Gartner report, and I saw a question go by. Thanks, Johan, for answering them as they went by. But a question about whether we could, provide access to the Gartner survey. If you Google like Gartner Magic Quadrant for 2015 for EFSS, which is Enterprise File Sync and Sharing, or if you Google Magic Quadrant and who won? Someone who was good, and Box, or who's the winner? I told you who the winner was.
Box.
Box, I think. Yeah,
Yeah.
they want to publish the report, so they are happy to make the report available, but then you have to put in your information, and they'll send you some emails. But Gartner, that's how they make their money, by not making that. We can't give it to you without violating their copyright, so you have to get it by other means. But anyway, they said that by 2018, less than 10% of today's standalone EFSS offerings will exist in their mind, and that for them, I think that partly means that there's the huge shakeout that has to come, but also that a lot of these are going to be subsumed by the larger enterprise content management solutions. That it's not enough to just have document sync and storage, but you need to be able to have these workflows and lifecycle management features and so on that are part of the larger ones. So I think that's fine for Google. It's fine for Box. It's problematic potentially for Dropbox, although they're so strong with their consumer space that they may be around still, or they might get bought by Microsoft or something. We'll see. Although Microsoft just spent a bunch of money on LinkedIn, so maybe they don't. Anyway, I'm stop. I'll stop. Sorry, Johan.
All right. Well, thank you both very much. Very, very interesting. Chock full of information. I think I might have to go back and watch the recording just to take it all in. So we're gonna end now. Actually, we're kind of out of time. We've tried to answer a lot of questions both in the webinar and through the chat window throughout, and I think we've actually managed to answer most questions. So a quick announcement: our next webinar series, as I mentioned, is around IT management. It's going to be our third quarter theme, and it's going to start Thursday, July 21st. I'm actually going to be leading that webinar and talking a little bit about how to create a nonprofit IT department. I found that nonprofits of all sizes, whether they're 5 staff or 500, really have pretty sophisticated set of IT needs, and it really kind of requires a full sort of the functionality of an IT department to meet all of those needs. So we're going to get into that topic. So please be sure to sign up for that webinar. So we're going to send you a little survey after the webinar. It really helps us to continue to keep making these webinars interesting and going in the right direction for the nonprofit community. So appreciate any time you could give to answering that survey. If you missed anything, we will be sending out a link to the slides and recording. Those will be uploaded to our SlideShare and YouTube sites later today. And we do encourage you to connect with us on Facebook, on our YouTube channel, through LinkedIn, and we have a great blog on our website. You can subscribe to it in RSS if anybody still does that, or you can just go straight to our website, go to the blog, and we in particular have a number of really great articles on this topic. So I encourage you to check that out. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to being with you next month. Take care.